think that the Obama administration has what it takes to protect this country from a nuclear Iran? Well, joining us right now in the Savage Nation with his opinion is columnist and the executive director of Protect America Today, J.D. Gordon. J.D. Gordon, welcome back to the Savage Nation. So give my audience an update on what's the situation with Iran right now.
Well, I think that President Obama is just showing weakness. He wants to continue efforts at diplomacy with Iran, but those efforts haven't led anywhere thus far. The only thing that they've done is they've bought more time for Iranian scientists to develop nuclear weapons. And I think the Iranian regime only understands one thing, pressure, and lots of it. So I think in order to convince Iran to drop its quest for nuclear weapons, all options have to be on the table, including the credible threat of massive military strikes against dozens of nuclear sites. And some of these sites are buried in mountainsides, like near Qom, south of Tehran.
Well, are there any alternatives to a military strike in Iran?
I don't think the military option is necessarily the only one that will work, but it's probably going to be the most realistic option to stop their nuclear program. The best way to stop Iran from getting a nuclear weapon is to support their opposition, because unless we want to have massive airstrikes and boots on the ground, the best way to stop Iran from getting nuclear weapons is to make sure this regime doesn't exist, because this regime will stop at nothing to get nuclear weapons. They think that they should have more power than they do. They were trying to get nuclear weapons for quite some time. In fact, the only reason they stopped enriching uranium back in 2003 is because they saw what happened to Iraq. So I think that unless we have a credible threat of military strikes, Iran's going to keep on doing what they are, and I don't think they respect President Obama. When he first came into office, he wanted to just negotiate with him without any preconditions, which the mullahs found laughable. And President Obama also failed in that in 2009 we had a perfect opportunity to get involved to help the opposition. Remember, there were hundreds of thousands of Iranians protesting for democracy in Tehran. The girl Netta was killed. That became very newsworthy throughout the world, and I think we missed a golden opportunity to help them. I think we should start now where we left off, where we should have been, and that is get involved now to topple this regime while we still can before they have a nuclear weapon.
Why is Obama completely ignoring the Republican call for military action against this fascist state of Iran?
Well, I think that President Obama is really a weak leader. I think if you look at his position with Iraq to withdraw the troops completely and not even leave a footprint there, that leaves a vacuum for the Iranians to fill. And it begs the question, why did we lose so many troops in Iraq if we're just going to pull out completely? Because the majority of Iraqis are Shiites, and they're aligned with the Shiites in Iran. So I think he telegraphs weakness at every turn, and he reminds me a lot of Neville Chamberlain. Neville Chamberlain, he negotiated with Adolf Hitler to basically allow Hitler to take over the Sudetenland, which was part of Czechoslovakia. And Neville Chamberlain went back to Britain. He said, well, we're going to have peace in our time. Well, guess what? That didn't last, because the next year Adolf Hitler invaded Poland, because Hitler didn't think Poland should exist either. So when you have a leader like Ahmadinejad saying things like Israel should be wiped off the map, I think you have to take him at his word. So that's why Iran cannot have nuclear weapons, and we need to do everything we can to prevent him from getting weapons before it's too late. The sanctions have been good, covert actions have been good, but they haven't stopped Iran from marching towards nuclear weapons.
Do you believe Israel will attack Iran before the United States does?
I think Israel's going to act in its interest, and if it sees that Iran is getting very close to developing nuclear weapons, I think it will attack. It's hard to say right now when that will occur. Prime Minister Netanyahu was just in Washington, and he said that it's not going to be within days or weeks, but I think the time is getting dangerously clear for Iran to advance with their nuclear program to the extent that it can't be stopped. They're building facilities underground. They have a place in Qom, which is south of Tehran, that's buried in a mountainside. And Israel just doesn't have the bunker buster bombs to the extent and capability that could actually ensure destruction of those facilities. So I think if Israel was to conduct a bombing campaign, which is about 1,000 miles away, by the way, unlike the Syrian facility, which it bombed in 2007, a couple hundred miles away, the Iraqi nuclear facility in Osirak in 1981, which is about 500 miles away, it would be much harder for Israel to destroy their nuclear program, if not impossible. What the best case scenario for an Israeli strike would be is just to delay the Iranian program for a couple years and give sanctions and covert actions more time to work so that the regime can't sustain itself. But airstrikes alone won't work. So unless we want to have boots on the ground to ensure the nuclear program is halted, the best way we can stop Iran is working with their opposition, and we need to do it today. And I just don't think Obama's the leader that can get it done.
Well, do any of the GOP candidates really have what it takes to stop Iran from getting a nuclear weapon? They haven't said very much about it.
I think that 3 of the 4 are certainly strong enough to do it. Governor Romney, Senator Santorum, Speaker Gingrich, they've all talked about the fact that they will not tolerate a nuclear Iran. And I think they're a lot stronger leaders than President Obama is. Ron Paul, of course, is to the left of Obama on foreign policy. Ron Paul basically says that Iran wants to develop a nuclear weapon because they saw what happened to Iraq and Afghanistan. And so I think if you're making that type of argument, Ron Paul certainly wouldn't be the choice to protect our country from a nuclear-armed Iran.
What is Iran doing in Latin America? Tell the savage nation.
Well, Iran is trying to make inroads with Latin America. President Ahmadinejad has visited Venezuela, Bolivia, and several other countries that are anti-U.S. in recent times. And in fact, last week I met with some Bolivian senators in Washington, and they told me that they were up to 100 Revolutionary Guards, part of the Quds Force, Iranians, that were actually in Bolivia training military officers from the ALBA bloc. And ALBA is the anti-U.S. bloc of Cuba, Venezuela, Bolivia, Ecuador, Nicaragua. So what I think that Iran could do if they developed a nuclear weapon, they could actually try to introduce those into places like Cuba, Venezuela, Bolivia, and then we'd be looking at a Cuban Missile Redux. And to me, I'm very concerned about the possibility of that.
J.D. Gordon, thanks for joining us today on The Savage Nation.
Michael, it was great to talk to you. If your listeners could go to my website, it's www.protectamericatoday.com. We're a new organization founded about a month ago, and our goal is to strengthen national security and foreign policy.
This is Dr. Dissident Michael Savage, back in a moment. Savage.